System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Today is Thursday, September 26th. I am Amin TMK along with Inner City Left co-founder Emoji Lil Tanky Sumler. They know you. They love you. How are you doing, my friend?
Man, we're trying to get it. You already know.
Big things happening. Big things going on. Let's talk about the UN, shall we? The guy, Joey B., the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, made a sighting at the UN General Assembly, talking about many things, but specifically the Ukraine war. He said this: the good news is Putin's war has failed at its core aim. He set out to destroy Ukraine, but Ukraine is still free, said Biden. We cannot grow weary. We cannot look away. He also mentioned that NATO is stronger than ever before. Thoughts on this, context on this? What are your feelings?
It's all vibes. I mean, once again, right, this is the Democrat way of being. The thing that's interesting to me is the biggest part of applause he got in that whole meandering speech was the part where he said that too many people have died in Gaza, right? That we need a ceasefire. The whole world clapped for that one. Way less so with the Ukraine. Look, the global south is over it. And let's be honest, most of Europe is over it. I'm seeing countries starting to really tap out on this. They've spent the money they can spend. They've wrecked their economy. Germany is in shambles. They went from being the number one manufacturer in Europe to having Volkswagen, which didn't even have to close during World War II and the Nazis, right? Having to close. This is something that hasn't happened for more than almost 100 years. So that should tell you what the general economic health of Europe in general is looking like, right? And these are the kind of things where the people see that and they're tapping out. They just can't care. And I just I won't spend too much time on this, but they see the threat is real. Lavrov has given several speeches on this. What's funny to me is Biden continues to impugn upon Putin goals that were not Putin's goals.
Never stated anywhere.
Never, like Putin. Look, man, one of the things that people that do geopolitics right now all across the board are being accused of is being pro-Putin. And I'm not pro-Putin, but I fail to be anti-Russia, right? In a way that the system recognizes. And that's the real thing. You don't have to be pro-Putin, and they know that we're not, right? But we're not anti-Russia. We don't have an inherently, why is Russia doing this, right? As opposed
we've talked about this, and
right.
It's foolish that we have to admit it. And what if I just were to tell you? What if I were to just tell you I do like Russia? What if I were to tell you I do like Putin? We've talked about it on the show. What's the real alternative to Vladimir Putin in Russia?
As it
relates to Russian and Russian culture. Well, it's the communists. It's right. People that are completely. Russia did everything they had to do, right?
To be known, when Putin goes and the commies of Russia take power again, I'm not gonna cry, So don't tell me I'm pro Putin. But I am pro reality, right? And that's where Biden's speech veers away. And I don't want to say I feel bad for him because I don't feel bad for Biden. But you start to wonder, does he really believe this? Or is this just what his handlers are telling him? Right? Kursk is a disaster. It's a disaster. Now, there were goals for the Kursk offensive with the Ukrainians, none of which have been met. They've essentially been stalled. They're in very serious danger of having their most elite forces in their army surrounded. This is real. That's what's happening at Kursk. That's why you don't hear him talking about it that much. When it is talked about, it's the blame game. Zaluzhny, who was the commander in chief of Ukraine, pointing the finger at Zelensky, saying he fucked this up, and that this was a waste of troops and money and Western military support vehicles, all of that stuff. That's what you hear, right? When you're really watching what's happening in the Ukrainian situation. The Donetsk, Luhansk, that area, that's almost completely wrapped up. I mean, all of Oblidar.
So are you saying that Vladimir Putin's official stated goals the special military operation to liberate the Donbass is going to plan.
Yeah, I mean, what he said he was going to do is exactly what's happening. I mean,
but he lost.
Right. Yeah, by the American
silliness
metric of whatever,
he didn't take over Poland. He didn't do it in a week. He thought he was going to do it in a week. Why would he think that? The Ukrainian military is incredibly powerful. One of the most powerful, if the most powerful military country in Europe, other than Russia itself.
Right.
I want to point this out too, because Kursk is like another great example of this new thing that we're talking about. Not that it's new to me as a baby in this game, but political victories is something that I've been hearing a lot. Kursk is a political victory because it allows Ukraine to have positive news within the media, and it goes kind of this feeling that the way that Joe Biden and the Harris campaign, how they talk to American citizens with Little John and just blatant lies everywhere they go, no accountability, no policies. Over a month, the policies are still vague. 200 Republicans are endorsing this person, and it just kind of seems like the political lens that everybody in the United States exists in. He's trying to sell that to the UN, but the UN has many countries that are feeling the brunt of these issues, so it's difficult to sell them that like political victory because they're facing the harsh realities there. The other thing I wanted to ask you about too, or at least mention, was this Benjamin Netanyahu message to the Lebanese people, which was in English. It was in English subtitles, and again, it's stated to be for the Lebanese, but who it's for is Western media and the Western world. And it kind of feels like that's what this UN speech was. Biden going up and giving those same talking points he gives to the American public or the European public or the Canadian public, that they eat it all up. And like you said, the global South is not buying it.
Netanyahu's in a whole nother class of politician than, honestly, either Trump or Kamala. I mean, he's just way more skilled than them. And I'm going to circle back to that. I just want to say, one of the things I get a lot of flack for from my liberal and leftist friends is I don't watch the debates. As much as I can, I try not to. Because what's the fucking point, right? The only way you could redeem it is to allow these things to truly be town hall debates where people from all over America get to come in, get to register, and the questions come from them, not the questions that are personally curated from Fox or CNN or MSNBC.
Or perhaps we could put Claudia De La Cruz or Jill Stein up there. That could also add to the validity of it.
Absolutely. They're deeply unserious because I got to tell you, no matter what you personally tend to think the most important election issue is right now, the real answer is, are you willing to go to World War III for Taiwan, Israel, or Ukraine? And I want every American candidate to answer that question for the record. That's the real question, because that's where we're at. China recently, and when I say recently, China and Russia over the last week tested their largest nuclear-capable ICBM delivery systems. And if you think this is just something that happens, China has not run this particular test on their ICBM system in 45 years. And the missile went past the distance it would take to hit Hawaii. Trajectoried in another way, you can absolutely see this was a demonstration from the Chinese government to once again remind the Americans, you won't be protected. If the war comes to us, the war will come to you. Now, Netanyahu giving the speech to the Lebanese, an Arab country. If there was any
speaks Arabic,
right? If there was any European language that was spoke in Lebanon, it would probably be French, not American or English. I'm sorry.
All right, Sarah Palin.
Right. Because Lebanon was a French colony, right? So whenever you see Netanyahu give a speech in English, it's strictly for Americans. And so that the conservatives and the Democrats can be like, look at what a humane man he is. He's telling Lebanon, leave your homes where you didn't realize it, but Hezbollah,
they got missiles in your house. They put them in there.
Like, this is the
smuggled them.
Dumb stuff that he says, and Americans are like, see what a humane. I mean, so that's just theater. But meanwhile, you know,
let's talk about these ICBMs. That seems like to be a very real and legitimate threat. And like you said, it's something that hasn't happened in an age. It's been some time.
Missile technology is an area where the United States lags. And that's just the truth. And
Donnie J has been talking about this, that he wants to
talked about this. This is correct. Obama, to be fair, Obama and President Trump, President Obama and President Trump both tried to revitalize the American nuclear deterrent. And they spent billions of dollars to do this, but you're behind the eight ball, right? America, look, you only got so much money, even when you're spending 10 times more than the rest of the world combined. American corruption and American weapon systems are just so expensive. You have to prioritize. And what we prioritized then was wowie-zowie technological weapons. Fifth generation fighters and Space Force and all that. China, Russia, countries like Iran, they prioritized missiles and missile systems. And those systems are more advanced than most of the American, at least admitted, weapon systems, right? Look, again, I'm not here to argue with conspiracy theorists that believe, Zerpa-derp, the alien, gave Americans this 20th generation, super lasers. And
proton cannon.
You know what I'm saying? Because if America don't want to lose, if they had it, they would use it. That's just where I'm at with that. I just don't believe in these big secret military techs that the Americans are not using, because there's every reason to use them right now. Again, as we said in the last podcast, the American empire is being challenged on all fronts. This is something that even Biden was caught saying on a hot mic. China's testing us everywhere. They're testing us in the East China Sea, the South China Sea. I mean, just
the North China Sea and the West China Sea.
Take as much time with that as you need to, right? Democrats. But they realize that, right? So if they had these weapons, they would be utilizing them. The missile gap has gotten so far that even the forces that are resisting the Israelis in northern Lebanon were able to fire a ballistic missile into Tehran. And this is the second missile attack that's happened ostensibly to not Tehran. I'm so sorry, Tel Aviv. They were able to fire this into Tel Aviv, and this is the second one within the last week that's happened, because the Houthis hit them with a hypersonic in Tel Aviv. Right? Israel's missile defense was pitched as the undefeatable, undeniable, right? So, like, if this is the technology that resistance fighters in Lebanon have, imagine what weapons Iran has. Now, take that up an order of magnitude and imagine what kind of weapons, okay, that the Russians have and that the Chinese have, okay? So the weapon that the Chinese launched is actually, fuck what you heard, the most terrifying weapon the world has ever known. It is a MIRV, right? And you can look that up. But what that means is it's an ICBM, that's an intercontinental ballistic missile that launches from one body, right? That's the rocket. It puts it into space, and the warhead breaks down into several other small warheads, each of which contain a nuclear device. So that's a MIRV. I mean, it's like Transformer shit. One missile goes up, 10 warheads come down, okay? That's what they tested. And to great success, I might add. Russia's ICBM test was less successful, and Americans launched on that. But again, that's not good news, because what that tells you is the Russians are finding the weaknesses in their systems before it's mission critical, right? The only way that would have been good news is if it was already a nuclear exchange that was happening. And, oh my God, Russia's premier system failed, right? But that's just one of their systems. They still don't even have to utilize nuclear weapons to be incredibly threatening to the West and to the Americans. The Avant-Garde system, which is their premier kinetic warhead. What a kinetic warhead is something that's moving so fast, like the hypersonics, that it doesn't necessarily need a high explosive to generate the destruction force. It's just physics, right? Mass equals, it's what is it? It's essentially, it has so much speed that the energy released in the impact is able to simulate that of like a small tactical nuke, right? That's what the Avant-Garde system does, which can be fired from a submarine. You know what I'm saying? God knows where the Russian nuclear fleet is. I don't know. And the fact is, nobody knows. Just the same way nobody knows where the American submarine fleet is. The same way nobody really knows where the Chinese submarine fleet is. That's the point of those kind of weapons. Like, as a Gen X kid, we knew this all the time. You know, we were terrified. It was all going to end in nuclear war. Oh, my God, here we are once again having to worry about these things. This is why I say, again, whatever you think your primary election goal is, it's not that. Your primary election goal needs to be finding a candidate who will vow that under no circumstance will they allow the United States to be put into a global conflict that risks the utilization and exchange of nuclear weapons. Because this ain't our.
I think it's important for people just to acknowledge right now at this time that the amount of weapon systems that can cause massive damage, there's a large number that excludes all of the atomic weapons. I mean, includes the atomic weapons, but also includes very more. There doesn't have to be a nuclear war. And we hear this all the time, too. Like, what is the price? Like, oh, like not the price, but like, oh, America could win this war, or America could win a war against this many people. And like, I think people are like, what is winning a war? I think a war is actually a loss. Like, when you start a war, that's an actual loss. So the winning of a war, it's a weird thing to say to someone, because no matter what happens, when a war happens, you're going to have obviously mass death. But not only that, you're going to have animosities that last a long time. Mass sexual assaults. It just happens during war. There's no way around it. Their radiation of, the land because of, like all of these weapons that they are utilizing. And I think, again, I mean, we've been trying to warn on this. You've been trying to warn on this, that, we are at any moment just a few hours away, maybe 36 hours away from a conflict that could touch everyone. And it is important to acknowledge, too, like, we have said that World War III is happening. Ever since Brian Berlitic said it almost 2 years ago. I mean, it's important to acknowledge the world is at war. Not only do we have that speech about the Ukraine war, but also more tensions surrounding China. It seems like, the UN General Assembly was just sort of this podium where people got up and, especially the West, began to warmonger just like they normally do. And this was one of the more intense moments in the UN. I mean, the Jordanian
it goes back
King
to those
was here. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about the people that were taking pot shots, not even pot shots, just outright talking shit in China, right? I think the person that came to my mind the most, right? The way that I don't like to watch debates, I love watching the General Assembly speeches. It's just important to me to hear what the different world leaders say, right? Whether you believe it or not, this is what they're saying to the world, right? And Alinsky gets up, right? This man who shouldn't even be there because, again, you're not the duly elected president of Ukraine. You're past your term limit. You're even past the term limit of the martial law that you set that extended your, because that had a timeline too, and you're way past that. So this person he's literally a dictator at this point, an unelected dictator that's essentially president for life. And he gets up and he gives a speech about autocracy in China and how China and Brazil are doing everything they can to help the Russians. I mean, these kind of speeches, it's the kind of vitriol that's so detached from reality. Because again, if China wanted to end Ukraine, it would be over way faster than the Russians, because they don't have any type of cultural ties that would allow them or induce them to hold back. Like the Russians are holding back with pretty much everything they have.
Right. China doesn't go to war. I mean, that's just not what they do. And they're not trying to do that. I mean, I think that's the other thing. Like, we always talking about who's going to win if China goes up against the United States or blah, blah, blah. It's like these countries are doing everything in their power to avoid actual conflicts. And they've said that that's the reason that they continue to exist within the UN.
China and Brazil put out a peace plan, right? That says, look, we're going to deal with the real politic of this. There's no way for Ukraine to get this land back. Just like there's no real way for Syria to get their land back from the United States, right? Like, it's just beyond the scope of what is real, what can really happen. And anybody
because force matters. And someone with force is not going to allow this to happen. So this is where diplomacy is supposed to come in.
the ridiculousness of the Zelensky peace plan, which is what he's discussing.
The peace plan.
The peace plan, right? Is they see, I just need y'all to understand how ridiculous this is. They see the Russians leaving Crimea, leaving the Luhansk, Donetsk, all of those areas, right? As the starting point. Like, that's not even, and then after that, we can begin to talk about reparations. Hey, what? Like, this is just not real talk. You have lost
exactly.
You've lost this land in the battlefield, right? And you didn't have to. You didn't have to. Because 2 years ago in Istanbul, in the Istanbul Accords, where the Russians sat down with the Ukrainians, they talked about what would be acceptable to both sides. The Ukrainians signed, the Russians signed. Boris Johnson, I always want to say Boris Yeltsin. Boris Johnson came from Britain, who was the prime minister at the time. You know, you may know him as the white guy who won't comb his fucking hair. And he shuttered the whole thing. He's like, nah, you don't have to do this, right? And come to find out, he was egged on by Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State in the United States of America. So now it's went wrong for you, and you want to go back to that kind of an agreement where the Russians are telling you straight up, like the mafia, your price just went up. No, we won this. It cost us thousands, some say tens of thousands, some say hundreds of thousands of Russian lives to get this land, and we're going to keep it, right?
And the whole point goes back to the Donbass was supposed to be a protected area for Russian speakers to live in Ukraine. And,
Right.
and I think we lose sight of why the special military operation was done in the first place. And it was done to protect those people in the Donbass and Luhansk areas from the oppression of the, Zelensky government, which, was religiously intolerant, culturally intolerant. Again, we can ask folks to go back and look at, the Maidan coup, the Minsk agreements, and, sort of the causality of what brought us here. Anyway, I just wanted to add that in there.
I mean, all of that is wonderful context, and it's really real for those of you that are not aware of those things. I would say before you begin to talk about the Ukraine conflict, you should familiarize yourself with the Minsk Accords, the Istanbul Accords. Those are just two places to start. Like, if you haven't read that, you don't know enough to really have an intelligent conversation. You know what you heard on CNN, which is fuck all, But moving on back to the other speeches, the thing about it is the United States' lack of meeting their own promises, right, has left so many leaders in such a point. Whereas, I mean, it was open season on Israel. Erdogan got up and said, when are we as Arabs going to stand up and do something? Look at this. The Israelis have attacked yet another Arab nation. It seems like this is what the United Nations have put together to try to keep these kind of things from happening, right? And you, like, people want to, like, oh, you're against the Israelis going into Gaza, you're against the Israelis going into Lebanon, but you're not against the Russians going into, Luhansk. As we've already said, the people in Luhansk are ethnic Russians. They're ethnic Russians. They speak Russian, they worship Eastern Orthodox in the Russian tradition. These guys are Russians. Some of these people are old enough that when they were born, it was still the Soviet Union. Okay, anybody over 40 years old, if you were born in Ukraine, no, the fuck you weren't. You were born in the Soviet Union. Okay, so when we're talking about places like Lebanon has never been part of Israel, ever. Like, even in the Bible, okay? Woo. Nor has Gaza, by the way. It's where the Philistines lived, okay? You might remember David and Goliath. He ran away from Saul, went to Gaza, hid out with the Philistines, learned how to do war, right? If you finished reading the
Some real context right there.
The Philistines actually protected David. It's a whole thing, right? So they're not analogs. You can't compare them. And so you end up with these Arab leaders that have covered for Israel for so long. Their own reign is tenuous now. The Jordanian, as you said, I almost said president, but he's the king.
The king
of Jordan, who speaks Arab with a wonderful British accent, got up and gave a speech.
Inshallah.
In flawless English. And this is a person I give a lot of criticism to, because I see him as an Uncle Tom type dude. But I mean, his whole 15-minute speech was him talking about, I don't know how much longer I can do this. Like we will never, ever allow the Israelis to send the rest of the Palestinians to our country and to defraud them of their country, right? We will not do that. We won't stand by while Lebanon is attacked. Like he spoke in a way that I've never in all of my years of listening to speeches from him heard him speak. And this is relevant, right? Erdogan is a NATO is the president of Turkey. That's a NATO member, right? The king of Jordan. I mean, when the whole Israel-Iranian attack went back and forth earlier this year, Jordan actually scrambled its air force to intercept Iranian missiles. This is a person that's carried as much water for the Americans as can be done. You know, President General Sisi got up and gave a speech much to the same accord. And this is such a global South issue to the point whereas even the Colombian president, gave a speech much to the same thing where he called the Israelis a bunch of genocidal maniacs, right? And also went on to famously say, once again, it's not anti-Semitic to be pro-Palestinian because Palestinians are Semitic. Right? These are things that no one once said. No one wants people to think about these things too long, right? And that's just what the General Assembly has been. So it's been quite spicy. The Iranian foreign minister and president also gave wonderful speeches about, what the hypocrisy of the United States using language like human rights to set sanctions unilaterally on countries that they don't like, while covering for Israel 5 times at the United Nations Security Council. The Russians got up and gave these speeches. The Chinese got up and gave these speeches. So yeah, there were people, talking about Russia, but not that many. They were all European countries, right? Of course, Zelensky got up and said the horrible things that he said about Brazil and China, essentially subjugating them to the Russian demand, which again, right, is his white supremacist mind state. Like they have to be mind controlled by the Russians because no way that those brown and those yellow people can be thinking of this on their own, right? But most of the world leaders, they got up and they criticized Israel and they criticized the Americans. They criticized the West. And that was what the spice of that whole thing felt like to me.
And it's just to go to
sick of this shit.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes again. The United States is the bad guy. And I mean, this is something that we just have a lot of issue with domestically. People will acknowledge the violence that America perpetuates here domestically, and they don't want to acknowledge the ways that violence is perpetuated internationally. And the UN, the General Assembly was just proof of that. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners because we're on podcasts. Listen to us while you're on your way to work, on your way back from work, on your way to protesting, whatever it may be. That's, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so on and so forth. I want to give a shout out to our Patreons. You can be a Patreon too. What you got to do is you got to go to patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. And we have free memberships too. You won't miss a video that way. But I want to give a shout out to Turn Leftist, Dubsy22, Nicole Ledges, Jay Goulart 94, No Ground, RK, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. My friend, what do we miss? Other thoughts?
That's all the news that's fit to spit.
For Moja Lil Takey Sumler, I'm Amin TMK, Inner City Left. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.